Okay, this is the reaction time required practical. It's the first required practical on the biology paper 2, and it is for combined and for triple students. So the aim of this practical is to investigate how some kind of factor is going to affect the reaction time of people. For the method I've given you here, which you can read in your own time if you want to pause the video, is for a person catching the ruler. So the only thing we're changing is we're having a different person catching the ruler. And we change it on step 7. So all of these steps, step 1 to 6, would be exactly the same. And then you just change the person. If you were investigating something else, so let's say that you were actually investigating gender, then you would just make sure that person 2 was a different gender to person 1. And therefore you could investigate that. If you're doing age, you would just make sure that person 2 was a different age to person 1. If you're investigating dominant hand versus non-dominant hand reaction time, then what you would do is you would do all of your results for the dominant hand. And then in step 7, rather than switching people, you would have the same person now do it with their non-dominant hand. Because if you switch people, then you're changing two things. You're changing the person and the dominant hand. All right, so once you have collected multiple results, then what you're going to do is you are going to find a mean value for their reaction distance. So that's the distance that the recording on the ruler. Okay, so what we can see here is that we have got 3 measurements. So all we're going to do is we're going to do 27 plus 23 plus 19. And we're going to make sure we press equals. All right, and we're going to divide by 3. And that's going to give us a total of 23. It's worth sense checking our mean. Our mean should always fall somewhere between our lowest result and the highest result. So our lowest result was 19, our highest result was 27. So 23 sounds really sensible. Then what you do is you go to one of these things here, which is a reaction time lookup table. And we take our reaction time. So for 23, we find that a person with a reaction distance of 23 centimeters would have a reaction time of 22. So that is it. That is the practical. That's how you find someone's reaction time. Let's now have a look at some commonly asked questions and how to solve them. You will very often in exams be given a set of data and you'll have to do something with it. In this case here, we just need to look at what the effect is. So what we've got is we've got 5 different students and we are looking at their reaction time in milliseconds. And we are given before drinking coffee and after drinking coffee. And the question just says, what is the effect on drinking coffee on reaction time? And it is asking us to use the table. So we don't need to use any of our own knowledge of this. We're just going to use the data here. So let's have a look at person 1. Before drinking coffee, their reaction time was 385. After drinking coffee, it was 255. So we can see that the reaction time has gone down. Person 2, 420, 291. Their reaction time has also decreased. In fact, if we look at the pattern and we take it all the way through, we can see that every single person, their reaction time decreases. So it's all we need to do is a really basic statement. The effect of drinking coffee on reaction time is... If you feel as though you haven't done enough, then just look how many marks the question is worth. It's only worth 1 mark. So it's just a simple statement. That's all we need. You don't need to go in and start explaining why. Okay, the next question I've looked at, again, we've been given a table. Now this is a bit more tricky because there's a lot more going on in our table. We've got 2 students, student A and student B. And what we've done is they are, again, investigating their reaction time. And they've done 2 different ways of doing it. We're not told what those 2 different ways are. It's not important for the question. What we can see is that they have repeated our test 3 times and then they have calculated mean results. So it is just asking us to suggest. Now suggest means that we just need to give some kind of sensible reason. We don't need to explain anything. We just need to suggest 2, and they've made the 2 in bold. That means it has to be 2. If you just give 1 reason, you're only going to get 1 mark. Importantly here, if you give 3 reasons, that's okay. But if one of those reasons is contradicts one of the other reasons, then you would lose a mark. So it is sensible here. If it suggests 2 reasons, just give your 2 best reasons. Don't put in all the possible reasons that you would think, because some of them might stop you getting other marks if some of them are wrong. Okay, and so we want to know why student A reaction time was longer than student B's. So all we need to do here is just say any of those factors that we already looked at earlier. So it might be one of the common factors in reaction time is age. As you get older, your reaction time decreases. All right, that is one of them. Okay, another one is the effect of caffeine. So that's a really common thing that they ask about in the required practicals. Caffeine is a drug which increases reaction time. So it may be that student B has taken caffeine. There are 2 reasons. I'm happy with those 2 reasons, so I'm just going to leave the question there. I could have also said other things. I could have said that student B has done this practical before, so they're more practiced. That would have increased reaction time too. All right, so decreased reaction time. So there are lots of factors that can play, but because we were asked specifically for 2, just give you 2 best ones. What they've done here is they have linked this topic of reaction time to reflex actions, and that's because that's what it is in the specification. That's where it comes in. It comes under the nervous system. So we're given this diagram, really common diagram that the exam board used to show the nervous system. You need to describe. So when we're doing a describe answer, again, no explaining. Don't say why. Just look at the diagram and say what's going to happen, or use your own experience and knowledge of science to say what's going to happen. Describe how the stimulus from the hot pan reaches the muscle in their arm. Okay, so we just need to read the question for a bit of context. So a stimulus in the hot pan, as in when they touch the hot pan, they're going to feel pain, is going to cause a muscle in the arm, so this muscle here, to contract and move their finger away. It wants us to describe how the hot pan the stimulus reaches the muscle. So this is just the reflex action, okay? So I'm going to label it on this diagram to help it make sense. In the exam, you don't need to label the diagram. So the hot pan is the stimulus, okay? The thing that causes the reaction to take place. The receptor is the thing that picks up the stimulus. Now in this case, they've got a picture of the thumb there. So the receptor is going to be in the skin of the thumb. So this is the can't spell. That's the receptor. The nerve impulse then must be sent along this neuron here. Okay? Now, this neuron is called the sensory neuron. Maybe we should write that not over the top of there. Many people forget about the sensory neuron. The way that I always try and remind people about it is think about what reactions actually are. They are your senses. It is the way you detect and yourself within the world around you, your touch, your smell, your taste, all of those things are your senses. So this sensory neuron just takes your senses and takes them somewhere. So the stimulus picked up by the receptor, the information from the receptor travels along the sensory neuron. It gets to this part here. Now this is just a cut through basically of your spine, all right? And this is called your central nervous system. So that it arrives at your central nervous system. This is where a reflex reaction is different to a normal reaction. In the ruler drop reaction test, your body thinks, what do I want to do? All right, oh, I can see the ruler's being dropped. I need to catch it. So it goes to the brain and the brain says, catch it. And then the information is passed to the muscle. In this case, if you're touching a hot pan, you don't want to sit there and think, oh, my finger is melting. What should I do? You want something to be instant. You're avoiding long-term damage or death with these situations. So the central nervous system isn't going to pass this to the brain. It's going to just, the spine is just going to go straight to the muscle. So we've got something here called the relay neuron, which is the neuron that passes the information from the sensory neuron to the next neuron, or to the brain if it needs to. So we now need to get this information to some kind of effector. An effector is just the thing that does the action. So it has to again travel down another neuron, and this neuron is the one that connects the central nervous system to the effector. So this one is called the motor. So just remember with this one, motors make things move. Okay, so this is the neuron that is going to actually cause the movement. It's going to go to the muscle, and this is called the effector. Now, effectors can be two things. Effectors can be muscles, if the action is that you need to move, or it could be glands, if you need to release some kind of hormone. In this case, we're moving our arm away from the hot pan, so it's actually going to a muscle. So now we've got this labelled, all we need to do is we just need to now put this into a way that will give us marks in the exam. Actually, if you label the diagram, you're going to pick up quite a few of the marks. But what we really want, what the examiners are looking for, is a logical order of these things are happening. So this is a really sensible time to use a numbered list. The key word in here is that you are talking about receptors. So we've done that, so we can tick that off. I wouldn't put the tick through it just in case you want this bit marking. So we've talked about the receptors, but it's a good idea here. This is forming our plan. 2, the sensory neuron carries the electrical impulse to the central nervous system. When I'm talking about electrical impulses, the nervous system works by transmitting electrical impulses along these things called neurons. All right, what we can do here is we can write C and S because we don't want to write that out every time we're talking about the central nervous system. But the first time that you write it, please write things in full. All right, this is your exam. It's not a time for saving your arms. 3, now we don't need to mention the brain in here, what I talked about, because this is a pure reflex action. So that relay neuron is just there to pass the information. So we've talked about the central nervous system, and we've talked about the relay neuron. 4, we now need to talk about how the motor neuron. That is 4 points. We have talked about the motor neuron, and we've talked about the effector. It's just asking how the stimulus reaches the muscle in the arm. So we don't need to go on and add the 5th point to say that the arm contracts. We don't need to do that for this question. But if the question was worth more than 4 marks, if it was saying describe how the arm moves away, you would then need to add in the next step, which would be that the muscle contracts, which lifts the hand off the hot pan. Okay, and the final question, of course, I've put a 6 marker in here, a long response. So it's asking us to describe. Again, no need to explain anything, just say a step by step. It's asking for a method. Whenever you write a method, all right, really good, use numbered bullets. The examiner is looking for a logical order. So if you give them a numbered bullet point list, it's very easy for them to say, oh, this person understands the steps involved. I'm going to give you a little bit of background as an examiner. The first thing an examiner will do when they read your method is they will put it into a category. All right, there are 3 categories. You've got category 1, which is worth 1 to 2 marks. You've got category 2, which is worth 3 to 4 marks. And you have got category 3, which is worth the 5 to 6 marks. If your answer would lead to a valid result, you're going to end up in this 5 to 6 mark category, as long as you've got obviously some basic context in there. You need a valid result, and it needs to be logical, as in it's not all over the place. It's step by step. Do this, then do this, then do this, then do this, and you end up with a valid result. That's how you get 5 to 6 marks. If you have got logical steps and you've mentioned most of the information, but you wouldn't necessarily get a valid result because you missed something, it's going to cap your answer into the 3 to the 4 marks. So 3 to the 4 marks is what most people normally get. They remember quite a lot about the practical and they do a decent description, but what happens is, they normally just write a big chunk of text and it's really hard to discern what happens before what. So if you use numbered bullet points, you can get around this really easily, because all you do when you finish your answer is you go back in and you check, is this in the right order? And if you need to, you cross out your numbers and you redo the numbers in order to make the order logical. Okay? And you also need to very carefully think, does my method actually end up with the thing I'm being asked to do? So in this case, would it actually investigate the effect of caffeine? For 1 to 2 marks, that's where we've mentioned some things. So the examiner will give you some credit if you've mentioned a couple of things, like you've said that you're going to measure the distance on the ruler. Okay, but again, you wouldn't actually have come out with a not a valid result. So that's where, as I say, you've just mentioned a couple of things. You're hitting a few marking points. You would have said, right, give one person caffeine, don't give the other person caffeine. Measure the distance on the ruler. But that's all you've got. That's going to get you 2 marks, which is better than nothing, all right? You need to pick up those marks. Don't just leave these questions blank, but you just need to move yourself through the stages. Okay, so let's get into this. Let's actually show you what the method should look like. So we're being asked to describe a method to investigate the effect of caffeine on reaction time. So it's just the method that I showed you earlier, but in that step where you would switch people, we're using the same person, but we're giving them some caffeine. So you do this whole experiment first without caffeine and then with caffeine. So let's look at the steps. So the first thing, you get one person to sit with good posture. They put their forearm on the table and they're going to put their dominant hand overhanging the edge. That is step 1. Okay? They're setting up those control variables. We've got a second person here. He's now going to hold the ruler over their hand, and it needs to be vertical. And again, very clear. And if you want to get the 5 to 6 marks in terms of you're going to get a valid outcome, you need to say that you are going to hold the ruler at 0 centimeters on the ruler is between their thumb and forefinger. All right. And you're going to tell that person, get ready. At some point, I'm going to drop this ruler. Person 2 drops it and person 1 catches it as quickly as possible. You record the number on the ruler from the top of person 1's thumb. Again, that is important. Say where you are reading the measurement from. That's all about getting a valid result, putting you in that top category. I've put the animation on there. Look, there you go. That is what the top of the thumb looks like, just in case you weren't aware. Right, now we're going to give that person a little bit of a rest, all right? Because if we just do this over and over and over again, they might get tired, and the tiredness might contribute to their reaction time. So you give them a little bit of a rest. You're going to do it 5 times, all right? It doesn't matter about 5 times, as long as you do it a decent number of times. So 10 times is also absolutely fine. 1 time is not, 2 times is not, 3 times is your minimum, 5 times is a really good time. So repeat this 5 times. Calculate their mean reaction distance from the ruler. Once you've got that reaction distance, what you then do is you get a lookup table and you convert their ruler measurement into a reaction time using the table. Now, this bit is where it gets a bit different, because we're now investigating caffeine. If you're investigating dominant hand, you would switch it here. If you're investigating age, you would switch it here. We're investigating caffeine. So what we do is we give person 1, so the same person who's just done all of the other measurements, a drink of caffeine, all right? You don't need to specify what it is. And you want to wait 30 minutes. The reason you wait 30 minutes is because caffeine is going to take a little bit of time to get into their bloodstream and to get into their system to make an effect. And then what we do is we repeat. I've said steps 1 to 7. That's a mistake. It should say steps 1 to 6. So repeat these steps again. You don't need to, in your method, write it all back out again. Just say repeat steps 1 to 6 in order to find a new reaction time. So therefore, we're going to have 2 reaction times. We're going to have the reaction time without caffeine and going to have the reaction time with caffeine. This would get us 6 marks. It's going to get a valid result. I've got a reaction time with caffeine. I've got a reaction time without caffeine. That is the valid result. It's valid because I have talked about all of the things I'm going to control, such as having the ruler vertically, having catching it with the thumb and the thumb, and finger each time, reading it above the thumb, okay, and having my arm on the desk and using the non-dominant hand. That's how we get a valid result. We've got the results we need and we checked and controlled as much as possible. It's also logical because you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Now you can see here, I made a mistake. I said repeat steps 1 to 7. Because I've read it back to myself, I spotted that mistake really quickly. So my next tip in the exam would be, when you write your method, read it back to yourself and just check you haven't done anything silly like I did. So all I need to do is just cross that out and write 1 to 6. Very quick fix. Okay, you may have forgot something. You may have read it back and be like, oh, I forgot to tell them to repeat it 5 times. So you just write it down here and then you just cross out all the numbers and just write 1, 2, 3, and then just change this to 4 and then go back in 5, 6, 7. So it's very easy to make your answer logical if you use numbered bullet points. Top tip for the exam. I do hope that this deep dive into the reaction time required practical has been useful and helps you to feel more confident as you go into your exam, knowing what to expect and knowing what to write. If you like this and you want to have a look at some of my other resources, I do have workbooks for all of the exams on the required practicals. This one from Biology Paper 2 covers the reaction time one that we've just seen. Also the field investigations such as random sampling using quad rats and transect lines, which is one that students often struggle on. And again, summary questions for all of the exams so you know what to expect. You can find a link to this resource, the Biology Paper 2 Required Practicals, in the description below, and also a link to an area where you can look at the required practicals for all of the other exams as well.